Hi, my name is Carrie Gravlee. I'm a Talbot School of Theology graduate student, and I'm here to talk to you about the priestly ordination ritual today. We are not going to talk about the whole thing, that would take too much time, but just a few key parts of it that I've found to be really interesting. So as a refresher, we are in the point in our narrative where Moses and the people have reached Mount Sinai, and they have committed to each other in the covenantal relationship. They've gotten married, so to speak, and Moses has just returned from the top of the mountain with his vision given by Yahweh for the tabernacle and all of its accessories. So the point of that is to create a place where the Israelites and Yahweh can safely and regularly meet together. So it is a long ceremony. It goes for 7 days. The same thing happens every 7 days. And we are only going to talk about a few key pieces of it. So I'm going to read briefly Exodus 29, verse 7, and then verses 20 through 21. So we are hopping around a little bit. Verse 7 says, "Then," meaning Moses, "you shall take the anointing oil and pour it on Aaron's head and anoint him." Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2, verse 20, "You shall slaughter the ram," meaning the one that was slaughtered at the ram of ordination, which again, we're skipping things, "and take some of its blood and put it on the lobe of Aaron's right ear and on the lobes of his sons' right ears and on the thumbs of their right hands and on the big toes of their right feet and sprinkle the rest of the blood around on the altar." So that's step 2. Step 3, verse 21, "Then you shall take some of the blood that is on the altar and some of the anointing oil and sprinkle it on Aaron and on his garments with him. So he and his garments shall be consecrated, as well as his sons and his sons' garments with them." Aaron obviously is of the tribe of Levi, and he is being anointed and consecrated as high priest. His sons are of a lesser degree, also being consecrated. That is why actually this first step is only for Aaron and not for his sons, because we think he just needs a lot of extra anointing because he's the head guy, and he also has to obviously do more as far as access to Yahweh, getting into the Holy of Holies once a year. And so it designates kind of his elevated status. So the first step is the anointing oil. We will come back and talk about what that recipe is. But right now, it should just be stated that there was a recipe, that the base is olive oil, which was used for many things, not just holy oil, but for food and medicine, etc. And then it had some different spices in it as well that were rather costly. So this was a special recipe that was designed only for the purpose of anointing, which means it wasn't going to be taken home afterwards and, the leftovers used for some other purpose by one of the priests. This oil was meant to be smeared. That's actually what the word mashach means. The anointing is just to smear or to spread a liquid around in the tabernacle. So that could be the Ark of the Covenant. It was all the parts, all the furniture, all the utensils, the ritual vessels, and the altar, obviously, and then Aaron and later his sons, but right now just Aaron. So what we know from the text is that though the tabernacle itself was just a little anointing, we are told when it comes time for Aaron's anointing, it is not just a little dab, it is a pouring. Yatzak is the Hebrew word, and it indicates a significant amount of oil. So what's funny is that it's after he's been dressed in his priestly regalia, which was obviously very costly and detailed and beautiful, and to our ears, it sounds rather strange that we would then pour oil all over it. But if we think of oil as being kind of a very, very, very holy medicine, or I don't want to say Clorox because that's, I think, what the blood kind of is, the cleanser. But, it would be all right to see the evidence of that on Aaron, because it just reminds the people that he's set apart for God's holy use. We know that however it happened, whether he still had his turban on, he had a turban and a crown, whether they made him take it off, whether he kind of lifted his head, it was poured on him. And Psalm 133 tells us that this oil ran down upon his beard and down upon the edges of his robes. So it was a lot of oil. The second step that we talked about was that weird thing about the ears and the thumbs and the toes, which was the original reason I chose this passage, because it seems so confusing. Otherwise, the other things that we are told to do, or that Moses is told to do, are explained. Here's why we do it. We do it to consecrate. We do it to ordain. We do it to set aside for holiness. And then there's just this blood ritual where we take the ram's blood and we daub it on the right ear, right thumb, right big toe. Nothing significant that we can identify about right, other than in the ancient Near East, that was the preferred side. That's the only thing so far that our class has been able to come up with. But what we do know is that the Egyptian culture is still very, very strong in their memories. Obviously, the Israelites recently escaped Egypt after 400 years, and I imagine that the Egyptian culture and rituals were more significant to them than what, Yahweh was instituting. And so I think it was actually a great kindness of him to create part of the ritual in a way that they symbolically would understand. So what I mean by that is that Mesopotamia and Egypt both had rituals at this time that would take either an object like a statue or an idol, or even a person, as in a dead body in the case of Egypt, and do something ritually, ceremonially to kind of enliven them, for lack of a better term. For our time's sake, we're going to only talk about the Egyptian opening of the mouth ceremony. This started with deceased, more the well-to-do or the royalty asking in their death to be enlivened somehow again, and thus enabled to partake of some of the things that were going on in the afterlife, allowing them to live with the gods in some way, because they believe that the Ka, their soul, their spirit, would live on. And so what they would do was pay someone ahead of time to do it for them. Well, this eventually transferred to not just deceased people, but also statues of a deity or a wall relief that had an image of a deity. And so the idea was that we could similarly enliven these deities in some way to be able to receive worship from the people in the form of food or drink, basically just kind of bringing them into that in-between state between, yes, you're sitting here on a shelf or in a temple, but you're also kind of bridging that chasm to the divine. And so the opening of the mouth ritual in Egypt involved a priest taking an adze, A-D-Z-E, which is like a small kind of axe-looking thing. It's a sharp tool. And in the ritual, first spreading incense, sprinkling water, but then taking this adze and specifically touching the hands, mouth, and feet of these images. And the communication, as I said, is to create some sort of bridge, ambassador, whatever word you want to use, between the human and the divine. And so I suggest that it's kind of one giant pantomime here that Moses is performing on Aaron and his sons, knowing Yahweh knows that it's something that they would recognize and understand to mean that they are becoming equipped to do this new job. The final portion we're going to talk about today is the blood and oil splattering. So we read that after all this, we've poured the oil, we've done the blood, then we need to do more. And I think to our ears, that seems a little bit strange because we're like, well, we already, we've done that step already. But in the Hebrew mind of the times, that would have been needed because in the same way that dirt or sin or whatever can accumulate, so too can holiness, for in very, very, very basic terms. And so perhaps on day one of the ceremony, the blood and oil would not have been enough to get them sufficiently holy. By them, I mean not just the people, but again, the altar and all those places. But perhaps by day 7 and then day 8, when we can kick this thing off for real, then they're sufficiently holy. And so the text doesn't tell us if they're supposed to be splattered separately with the oil and the blood or mix it together and do it. But we know that the result is to create more and more and more and more holiness. So that by the end of it, Aaron and his sons were actually more of a part of the furniture of the place, even more than they were the personnel, so to speak. So they're considered to be just one more instrument, one more tool that Yahweh is giving them to be able to bridge the gap between the Israelite people and the Holy God. So we're going to stop there today and talk later about the holy oil recipe.